David Walker had always found comfort in solitude. A renowned wildlife photographer in his mid-40s, he had spent most of his adult life chasing beauty in the wild. But this time was different. This wasn't a brief assignment or a guided expedition. He had chosen to live alone for 3 months in a modest wooden cabin on the edge of the Masai Mara National Reserve in Kenya. To work on a deeply personal photo book, one that captured the raw, unfiltered life of Africa's most iconic animals. The cabin was basic: a single room with a bed, a desk, and shelves lined with lenses and camera bodies. Solar panels powered a few lights and charged his equipment. No internet, no distractions, just him, the wilderness, and time. David woke each day before dawn. The sky still dark. He'd brew a cup of strong coffee and check his gear. By the time the first hints of orange painted the horizon, he was already in his Land Rover, camera in hand, eyes scanning the landscape for motion. Elephants moving silently through the morning mist. A pride of lions lounging in golden light. A solitary leopard disappearing into the tall grass. These were the moments he lived for. He respected the animals deeply, never intruding, always observing from a distance. His photos were quiet and intimate, capturing not just what the animals looked like, but how they lived. He waited hours, sometimes days, for the right moment, and when it came, he clicked once, maybe twice, never in bursts, never forcing it. In the evenings, he'd return to his cabin, dusty and tired. He transferred the day's shots to his laptop, labeled them meticulously, and made quick notes on what he saw. Then, usually with a simple meal of beans and rice, he'd sit outside on the porch, camera still nearby, and listen to the symphony of the savannah. Crickets, distant howls, occasionally, the deep, echoing roar of a lion. It was a peaceful, focused life, exactly what he had wanted. But it was also demanding in its own way. Nature, though beautiful, never catered to anyone's schedule. Sometimes the weather turned violently without warning. Other times, animals vanished for days. But David didn't mind. The unpredictability was part of the magic. One evening, after a particularly long day tracking a herd of elephants along the Mara River, David returned to the cabin later than usual. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the air had grown colder. He lit a lantern, ate quietly, and stepped out to brush his teeth. That's when he heard it. A sound, sharp, metallic, out of place. It came from the trees just beyond the clearing. He froze. Out here, any unfamiliar sound was worth noticing. Poachers were a threat, though rare near the edge of the reserve. And while animals often wandered close, they usually made themselves known in more natural ways, rustling leaves, breaking branches. But this, it sounded like a short, sudden scrape, metal on stone, or maybe a tool dropping. He waited, holding his breath. Nothing followed. Maybe it was just his imagination. He'd been out in the sun all day. Exhaustion played tricks. Shrugging it off, he walked back inside, double-locked the door, a habit more than a necessity, and sat down to review his photos. The shots from that day were good. One in particular, a baby elephant reaching its trunk toward its mother, made him smile. He selected it for the book's family section and wrote a short caption before calling it a night. In bed, though, the sound returned to him. It had been real. He was sure of it now. Quick, deliberate, and unnatural. But he didn't hear it again. And he didn't investigate. He told himself animals sometimes brushed against the cabin or knocked things loose. No need to overthink. He was in the middle of the wild. Strange sounds were part of the deal. Still, something about it lingered. Not fear. He wasn't someone easily rattled, but a quiet curiosity. A question without an answer. And that gnawed at him more than he liked to admit. The next morning, he rose before the sun again. The memory of the sound faded into the routine of preparation. Gear packed, water bottles filled, camera checked, tires inspected. But as he stepped outside, something caught his eye. Near the edge of the clearing, where the brush thickened into forest, a small patch of ground looked disturbed. He approached cautiously. The soil was soft, recently turned. Not by hoof or paw, but something else, something with purpose. He crouched down. There, half buried beneath a thin layer of dirt, was a metal object, shiny, clean. It was a spent cartridge. A bullet. David stared at it for a long time. This wasn't from a ranger. The rangers used different calibers. And they wouldn't fire this close to a photographer's cabin. And they'd certainly inform him if they had. He pocketed the casing, scanned the area, but saw no more signs. No boot prints, no tracks, just the quiet, steady pulse of the savannah waking up. The rest of the day, he couldn't shake it. The animals were still there, a group of zebras grazing near the water. A cheetah basking on a rock. But his mind kept returning to the sound, to the bullet, to the possibility that someone else had been nearby. And why? That night, he triple-checked the locks, moved his laptop under the bed, set a bell on the door, just in case. But he didn't leave. If anything, his focus sharpened. Whatever had happened out there, whatever or whoever had been near his cabin, it only deepened his resolve. The wild was pure, but it was also fragile, vulnerable, and maybe his book wasn't just about beauty anymore. Maybe it had to tell the truth. About everything. Even the parts that made you uneasy. Even the sounds that didn't belong. And so, David kept shooting, watching, waiting, knowing that the real story was just beginning. The morning broke in hues of gold and gray. A thin mist hovered over the savannah, wrapping the grassland in a quiet calm. Inside the wooden cabin, David Walker stood by the small metal sink, rinsing out his coffee mug. The routine was comforting, grounding. The scent of roasted beans still lingered in the air, mingling with the damp scent of dew-soaked earth wafting in through the open window. He wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary. But as he turned slightly to set the cup down, something in the corner of his eye made him stop. Outside the window, less than 5 feet away, stood a lioness. She was motionless. Her body was caked in thick, wet mud, turning her normally golden coat a dull, matted brown. Her mane, if it could be called that, hung limp and filthy. But what struck David wasn't her appearance. It was her eyes. She wasn't snarling. She wasn't baring teeth. There was no growl, no threat. She was crying. 2 thin trails of water ran down her cheeks, carving clean lines through the dried mud. Her amber eyes were fixed directly on his, wide and unblinking, filled with something David had never seen in a wild animal. Not like this. Desperation. It wasn't just pain. It wasn't fear. It felt almost human. David froze. His instincts screamed for caution. This was still a predator, after all. But his gut told him something else. Something deeper. This lioness wasn't here to attack. She was asking for help. He took one step back, still watching her, then grabbed his camera from the table. As the lens focused, he hesitated. Snapping a photo felt wrong. This wasn't a moment to capture. This was something else. A silent exchange. A cry from a creature that couldn't speak. He lowered the camera and reached for the radio instead. Base. This is Walker. Urgent. I have a lioness. Repeat. A lioness, right outside my cabin. She's alone. Injured. Maybe sick. Not aggressive. But something's wrong. She's crying. I need immediate assistance. There was static. Then a voice crackled through. Copy that. Walker. Stay inside. We're dispatching a ranger unit now. ETA. 30 minutes. Do not engage. David set the radio down and slowly crouched near the window, careful not to make any sudden moves. The lioness hadn't flinched. She stood there, still locked in that haunting gaze, her chest rising and falling in slow, shallow breaths. One of her front legs was trembling. Blood, barely visible beneath the mud, trickled near her haunch. He whispered, almost to himself, "What happened to you?" Minutes passed. She didn't move. David could see her strength fading. Her limbs wobbled slightly, and her tail barely swayed. But her eyes never left his. They asked him to stay. David had spent his life observing wildlife. He'd seen lions hunt, fight, rest, protect their young, but he had never seen one like this, broken, quiet, and so achingly aware. There was intelligence there, emotion, something that crossed the boundary between species. 20 minutes later, the sound of an approaching vehicle broke the silence. A green Land Cruiser from the conservation unit pulled into the clearing. Two rangers stepped out quickly but carefully, rifles in hand, tranquilizer darts ready. David met him outside. "She's not hostile," he said immediately. "She's hurt. Something's wrong. She came to me, like she wanted me to see her." The lead ranger, a tall man named Kamau, gave him a skeptical glance. "Lions don't just show up at people's doors." "David, I know, but look at her. She didn't growl. She hasn't moved." Kamau approached slowly, motioning to his partner to flank the lioness. As they neared, the lioness let out a soft, guttural sound, not a roar, more like a moan. She took one step back, then collapsed onto her side, too weak to hold herself up. David's chest tightened. Kamau signaled his partner. A dart hissed through the air and landed in the lioness's flank. She barely reacted. Within moments, her eyes closed, her breathing slowed. The rangers moved in, checking her vitals. "She's badly dehydrated," Kamau muttered. "Wounds on her left hind leg. Deep. Could be a snare injury. Maybe poachers." David stepped closer. "She came out of the forest yesterday. I heard something the night before. A strange sound. I didn't think much of it, but now." Kamau looked up. "You think someone hurt her near here?" "I found a spent bullet casing in the dirt. Same spot she came from." The ranger's expression darkened. "Then it's likely she escaped something worse." They moved the lioness carefully into the vehicle, prepping her for transport back to the rescue station. As they secured her, David placed a gentle hand on her muddy fur. Just for a second. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Back in the cabin, the silence returned, but it no longer felt peaceful. David sat at his desk, eyes fixed on the empty space outside the window. The wild had always been brutal. Yes, nature was indifferent by design. But this wasn't nature. This was the result of human cruelty, of intrusion, of the slow, creeping destruction he had always tried to avoid seeing too closely. He opened his laptop and pulled up the draft of his photo book. He scrolled through the images, powerful, beautiful, distant, untouched. Then he opened a new folder and titled it, The Crying Lioness. Maybe the book needed a new chapter. One that didn't just show beauty, but also told the truth. About loss, about survival, and about the day a lioness, covered in mud and blood, came to a man's door, not to attack, but to plead. The morning sun crept higher as the ranger vehicle pulled away from David's cabin. The lioness sedated in the back. But before they could drive far, the unexpected happened. The lioness stirred. It was too soon for the tranquilizer to wear off. But she began to shift, her breathing quickening. Kamal, the lead ranger, signaled the driver to stop. "She's fighting it," he muttered, kneeling beside her. "She's trying to wake up." Her paw twitched. Then her eyes opened, hazy but alert. She tried to lift her head, but it was too heavy. Her gaze found David standing nearby. She blinked once. Then, slowly, as if through sheer force of will, she attempted to rise. "Let her down," David said. "Let her lead us. I don't think she came here for help. Not just for herself." Kamal looked at him, skeptical but thoughtful. "You think she's trying to show us something? She didn't come here by accident. She was tracking something, or someone." The ranger hesitated for a beat, then gave a curt nod. "Let's see what she does." They eased the lioness from the vehicle. She wobbled as she stood, her legs trembling under her weight. But she stayed upright. Then, with slow, deliberate steps, she turned away from the cabin and headed toward the tall grass bordering the forest line. And after a few paces, she paused, turned her head, looked back, straight at David. It wasn't a glance. It was a gesture, a beckoning. David felt a chill run down his spine. "I'm going with her," he said. Kamal nodded. "I'm with you." So is Eli, the second ranger, a younger man with sharp eyes and quiet movements. Fell in behind them. Together, the three followed the lioness as she limped forward through the golden grass of the Mara. She moved slowly but with purpose, occasionally stopping to glance back, making sure they were still following. Her body was battered, but her spirit remained unbroken. Something was pulling her forward, and now, pulling them with her. The terrain grew denser. Thorny bushes and low acacia trees forced them into single file. The lioness weaved through expertly, never straying far, never running, always pausing, always checking. "Where do you think she's going?" Eli asked under his breath. "I don't know," David replied. "But she's not wandering. This is a trail." After nearly 30 minutes, they entered a small clearing surrounded by high brush. A faint smell lingered in the air, something musky, earthy, and wrong. And then they heard it. A faint, wavering sound, almost inaudible over the breeze. A cry. No, not a cry. A whimper. Weak, helpless. The lioness froze, ears twitching, eyes alert. Then she moved faster, urgency in her limp, leading them past a gnarled tree and toward a depression in the ground. David and the rangers pushed through the brush, and stopped. There, nearly hidden in a deep muddy hole, was a lion cub. Its golden coat was slick with wet soil. Its paws thrashed weakly, struggling to climb the slick walls of the pit. It let out another cry, more like a soft moan. The kind only the dying make when they're still hoping someone hears. David dropped to his knees. Oh my God. The lioness stepped to the edge of the hole, looked down, then back at David and the rangers. Her eyes no longer begged, they commanded. Save him. Without waiting for instruction, Kamal pulled a coil of rope from his pack. David scanned the edge of the pit, looking for a stable place to descend. We can't waste time, Kamal said. This cub doesn't have much strength left. David, stay up here. Eli, anchor me. David nodded, but he kept his camera ready, not to capture drama, but to record what needed remembering, what no one would believe without proof. Kamal descended carefully, his boots sinking into the soft mud. The cub let out a panicked noise, then stilled when Kamal reached out slowly. Gently. Easy, Kamal murmured. You're safe now. It took effort, but the ranger managed to secure the cub with a sling. Eli and David pulled the rope as Kamal guided the cub upward. When it reached the surface, David wrapped the trembling animal in his jacket, brushing mud from its eyes. It was so small, so silent now, but it blinked, once, and nuzzled into his chest. Kamal climbed out moments later, covered in grime. The lioness stepped closer, slowly, hesitantly. David set the cub down gently on the grass. Mother and child locked eyes. And then, with a soft whimper, the cub lifted its head, just slightly. The lioness lowered hers, touching her nose to the cub's face. Her body trembled with relief. She curled herself protectively around him, her muddy flank shielding him from the wind. None of them spoke. They stood there, David, Kamal, and Eli, watching something ancient, primal, and deeply moving unfold before them. Finally, Kamal broke the silence. She led us straight here. Through that pain. Through everything. Just to save her baby. David exhaled slowly. This isn't instinct. This is something more. They radioed the conservation center again. A rescue team was dispatched with a transport cage and medical gear. The cub would be taken for treatment, and the lioness would be monitored until she recovered fully. As they waited, David took one photo, just one. The lioness curled around her cub, their muddy bodies pressed together, both eyes closed, safe at last in the golden light of morning. Later, as they rode back in silence, David looked out over the vast plains. His book had started as a celebration of nature's beauty. But now, it was becoming something deeper. It was a testament to love, to sacrifice, and to a lioness who knew how to ask for help, and who led the way when it mattered most. The hole was deeper than it looked, nearly 4 feet of thick, clinging mud that pulled at anything daring to enter. The lion cub, barely alive, had sunk up to its belly, its tiny paws slipping uselessly against the slick walls. Its cries had grown fainter by the minute. A fading plea. Kamal wasted no time. He looped the safety harness over his chest, double-checked the rope Eli anchored around a nearby acacia tree, and nodded. I'm going in. David knelt by the edge with a towel and a bottle of clean water already in hand. His jacket lay nearby, opened and ready to wrap the cub the moment it was safe. The lioness stood just a few feet away, pacing, letting out low, trembling moans with every breath. She didn't growl, she didn't threaten, but her fear was palpable. Her eyes never left the cub. Kamal gripped the rope and began his descent, boots sinking instantly into the muck. The smell of wet earth was thick, mixed with the faint, sour stench of fear and blood. He moved carefully, 1 foot at a time, avoiding sudden movements. The last thing he wanted was to startle the cub or sink deeper himself. When he finally reached the bottom, he crouched low, spoke in a calm, steady voice. "Easy now, little one. You've been brave. Let's get you out." He gently slid his arms under the cub's belly. The cub whimpered but didn't resist. It was too weak to fight, its body limp with exhaustion. Kamau could feel the rapid flutter of its heartbeat against his chest. "Got him," he called. "Pull me up, slowly." Eli tightened the rope and began to lift. David braced at the edge, reaching out as soon as Kamau came into view. Together, they hauled the ranger and cub onto dry ground. The lioness rushed forward but stopped just short of them, her body tense, quivering. David wrapped the cub in the towel, cradling it like a newborn. It was soaked, trembling, eyes half shut. He uncapped the water bottle and let a few drops trickle into the cub's mouth. It swallowed. Then again. Hope. David held it close, warming the frail body against his chest. Then transferred it carefully onto the jacket, wrapping it tight to preserve heat. He glanced at the lioness. "You can come," he said softly, knowing she wouldn't understand the words, but hoping she'd feel the intent. She did. She crept forward and, with a deep, rasping groan, sat beside her cub. Her nose brushed his face. Then again, more urgently, her tongue flicked out, licking the mud from his eyes, his ears, his head. The cub stirred, a soft mule. His paw moved. The mother moaned again, this time, not in fear, but in fragile relief. Kamau knelt beside them. "We need to get him to the center. The cub won't survive without fluids and care. We'll bring her too." Eli had already called for the second team to arrive with a crate large enough for the lioness and a carrier for the cub. In the meantime, they kept both animals warm. David laid more towels and helped clean the cub's nose and mouth, using gentle fingers to clear mud from its fur. It was quiet in the clearing now. The panic had passed, but the tension lingered. Every breath the cub took felt like a victory. Every twitch of its ears meant another second of life. The rescue vehicle arrived 20 minutes later. The rangers carefully transferred the cub into a soft-lined carrier with a heated blanket. The lioness was more difficult. Though calm, she refused to leave the cub's side. "We'll sedate her just enough to transport," Kamau said. "We'll keep them together at the center." David didn't stop watching her, even as the dart went in. Even as her body sagged with sleep. She had done everything she could. She had crossed territory, faced humans, and stood vulnerable, not to protect herself, but to guide him to her cub. It was the kind of courage David had never seen in his decades photographing wildlife. On the ride back to the medical center, David sat beside the carrier. The cub's breathing had steadied, but its eyes remained closed. He reached in and gently stroked its ear with a single finger. "You held on," he murmured, "long enough for her to find us." The center's staff were ready when they arrived. Vets rushed the cub into triage while others tended to the lioness. Fluids were administered, vitals monitored. The next hours were critical. David stayed in the observation room, watching through the glass. Kamau stood beside him. "She did all of this," the ranger said. "Crossed nearly a kilometer with that injury. She knew where to go." David nodded slowly. "She didn't just come for help. She chose who to come to." Kamau looked at him. "You think she remembered you?" David thought of the times over the past weeks when he had seen lionesses from afar. Moments behind the lens, across the savannah, quiet connections that he had never thought much of. Had she been one of them? Had she watched him as he watched her? I think, David said, she knew who would follow. Hours passed. The cub was stabilized, weak, but no longer slipping. The lioness would recover, too. The cuts and blood loss were treatable. What she needed most now was rest, and her cub at her side. David finally stepped outside, the African sun now low on the horizon. He didn't raise his camera. He just stood in the warmth. Hands still muddy, jacket stained, heart full. Nature had always been about the hunt. The survival, the raw beauty of life untouched. But now, he knew there was another story, one about trust, vulnerability, and the bond that could exist between the wild and the human. If only one was willing to listen. His book had a new name forming in his mind. When the Wild Calls Back. The veterinary center buzzed with soft urgency. Vets moved quickly but calmly. Checking monitors, adjusting IV lines, preparing nutrients. The lion cub, once on the brink of death, now lay bundled in a warm blanket inside a quiet recovery room. A heating pad was tucked beneath its small frame, and tubes ran into its front leg, delivering fluids and medication. It had been a long night. But as the sun crept over the horizon the next morning, something shifted. The cub stirred. Its ears flicked. A soft noise escaped its throat, not a cry, but something hopeful. By mid-morning, it was lifting its head, blinking slowly, eyes cloudy but conscious. A vet brought over a shallow dish of warmed milk. The cub sniffed, hesitated, then drank, clumsily at first, then with growing strength. It was the first time David had truly exhaled since the rescue. He had been pacing outside the room, watching through the glass, barely sleeping, barely moving, when one of the staff finally came out and nodded. He's stable. He made it. David had to sit down, overcome by a wave of quiet relief. Later that day, with the cub still recovering but out of danger, the head vet allowed David into the enclosure. He's bonded to you in some way, she said. I think he remembers your scent. David stepped carefully into the recovery room, kneeling beside the cub's bedding. The little lion lifted his head. For a moment, he just looked. Then he shuffled forward and pressed his forehead gently into David's hand. David froze. Then his fingers moved, brushing along the cub's cheek. Over the delicate fur, the lion pressed closer, nuzzling into his chest, letting out a soft rumble. Not a roar, not a cry, just peace, gratitude. David closed his eyes. You're safe now, little one. For the next several days, David returned often. He sat with the cub, sometimes reading aloud from his journal, sometimes just sitting in silence. The bond between them was undeniable, strange, beautiful, and powerful. The lioness, too, recovered steadily in the nearby enclosure. Though sedated during the initial days, she grew more alert with each passing morning. She paced less, she ate more, but she remained restless, her eyes often scanning the horizon, searching. A week later, the rangers made the call. It's time, Kamau said. They're strong enough. We'll take them back, together. David rode in the back of the truck with the cub, now stronger, livelier, looking out at the open land with curiosity. In the neighboring vehicle, the lioness lay calm but alert, her ears twitching at every sound. her nose catching every scent. The conservation team had chosen a wide-open space in the heart of the Mara, near where the lioness had first been spotted weeks before. The sky was a deep orange, the sun beginning its descent. A warm wind rippled across the grass. The moment had come. They opened the lioness's crate first. She stepped out slowly, cautiously, sniffing the air. Her head turned in every direction until it stopped, when she saw the second vehicle. When they opened the cub's carrier, he hesitated only briefly, then he stepped out, blinking at the light, taking a few shaky steps. The lioness let out a sound no one present would ever forget, a low, trembling call filled with longing and recognition. The cub's ears perked. He turned and ran. Their reunion was quiet but overwhelming. She met him halfway, lowering her head as he buried his small body into her chest. She licked his face, again and again, inspecting every inch, making sure he was real, alive, hers. The team stood back, silent. David wiped his eyes. He didn't try to hide it. The lump in his throat was too big. The emotion too raw. It wasn't just the reunion. It was everything that led to it. The mud, the fear, the courage, the trust. He lifted his camera and took one photo. Just one. Mother and cub in the light of the setting sun. Bodies pressed close. Tails brushing the grass. Shadows long behind them. A portrait not of the wild, but of love. That night, back in his cabin, David wrote without stopping, page after page. Not just captions or descriptions, but a story. A story about a lioness who cried. About a cub who survived. About a moment where man and beast met on a silent bridge of understanding. He titled it, When Lions Cry and Humans Listen. The book was published 3 months later. It didn't just sell, it soared. Millions read it, not just wildlife enthusiasts, but people from every walk of life, teachers, students, parents, activists, because it wasn't just about nature. It was about empathy, about connection, about what can happen when we stop assuming and start observing, not with fear, but with compassion. The image of the lioness and her cub became a symbol of hope, resilience, and the fragile, powerful bonds that hold all life together. David Walker never returned to his old life. He remained in the Mara, continuing his work, mentoring young photographers, and working with conservation groups to protect the animals he had once only photographed. He had found something more than a story. He had found a reason. Would you like to explore an epilogue or bonus chapter?
Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please comment 1. And if you didn't, just hit like. See you in the next videos.